All right, I say out of the respect for everyone's time, why don't we go ahead and start with our presentation. Um, Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Danielle Brazel. I am the current General Manager of the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs, and I'm joined by Brianne Gilbert, Managing Director of the Thomas and Dorothy Levy Center for the Study of Los Angeles. And what is really exciting about the report and the presentation that you're going to find today, and I won't have any spoiler alerts, but last year, in the midst of, I think, one of the most challenging moments that we've all experienced in our lifetime with the height of the global pandemic, um, I attended a presentation on LMU's Forecast LA project. And it is a public opinion survey that they conduct semi-regularly. And I was astonished by the findings. And I thought, I wonder what the quote general public has what would they say about the role of arts and culture. So I reached out and essentially engaged in a partnership for kind of a separate brief for the attitudes of arts and culture. We worked together with creating 5 questions, and these are the results of that survey. We're going to do a brief presentation, and then we'll create an opportunity for some Q&A. And I'm going to hand it over to Brianne, but I just want to say what an extraordinary opportunity it is to work with Brianne and Alejandra Alarcon and Jorge and the entire LMU team. You all are exemplary, and the city is incredibly lucky to be in partnership with you. So let me go ahead and hand it over to you, and take it away, Brianne.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Danielle. And the feeling about partnering with you all in the Department of Cultural Affairs is extremely mutual. So, alrighty, just to kick it off, to provide a little bit of background about our research centers. We are a research center at Loyola Marymount University, and really what we want to explain that our goal is to truly advocate for a better, more equitable, and more just Los Angeles through research, student engagement, student mentorship, and this engagement with our residents and leaders. And here in this survey, we'll talk a bit about the findings from that engagement with residents in this particular survey. So for our surveys in general, it's very important for us to explain that we are communicating with residents. This is not a voter poll. This is of all adult residents within Los Angeles County. So you can see on the left, we have a brief legend of our different projects that we have conducted over the last several years since we started the LA Public Opinion Survey back in 2014. And on the right, you see a map of LA County, and each dot represents one adult resident in the county with whom we've interacted for our surveys. So more than 37,000 Angelinos that we have spoken with in typically about 20-minute surveys. So that would be going for well over a year, just nonstop. Although we could probably talk that long, but with our partners talking with residents about what Angelinos are thinking and feeling. And the LA Public Opinion Survey is unique. It is the largest general social survey of any metropolitan area anywhere in urban America that is conducted here at Loyola Marymount University. Typically, we're looking at several different themes for a particular year of survey, ranging from quality of life perceptions, looking at financial well-being, economic concerns, life satisfaction, and then whatever the civic issues are that are facing Los Angeles at any given moment. For example, in our most recent survey, looking at topics of homelessness and housing and COVID, and specifically for this project, talking about arts and culture as well. So more than 18,000 residents have participated in this one survey alone. A little bit about the background for this study. It is in its 8th annual year. We conduct this survey at the beginning of year, so from early January running through mid-February. It's a 20-minute phone survey that's conducted online and with face-to-face surveys as well. So we want to make sure we're not just capturing Angelinos by one mode. We want to try to reach Angelinos wherever they may be. So that's why we use all of the different modes listed there. And we conduct a survey in 4 languages, again, to be able to reach as many Angelinos as possible. So English, Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. And we could survey at least 2,000 residents. This year at 2,003 respondents, with approximately half of those in the city of Los Angeles. And then we weight the results back to the demographics for the county with a margin of error of plus or minus 3%. And then we do want to recognize we are very grateful for the Department of Cultural Affairs to come alongside and be able to support us. And we also have a number of other foundations, organizations, and entities throughout the county. And we're grateful for all of their support, and they're listed here. So the very first question that we'll focus on today is a question of how important, if at all, is having access to cultural festivals and or exhibits, such as street art or public art. How important is that for each of the following aspects: quality of life in your community, economic development, and sense of belonging in your community? Throughout the survey, I am going to, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, sound like a broken record. The results in general are extremely high. These are some of the highest levels of support we've seen on any of our survey questions any of our themes that we've had in the past. There's incredible consensus across demographic groups, across geographic groups, and we'll talk about some of those throughout the survey. But here we see that quality of life in your community, 90% would say that that is important. We see some small differences. We see that liberals are a bit more likely to say that it's important compared to conservatives, although again, extremely high numbers for everything. We also see that Black residents are a little bit more likely to say that quality of life in your community is more important as compared to Asian respondents, white respondents, or Latinos, specifically for the city of Los Angeles. Looking at the question of economic development, we see that the longer someone lives in Los Angeles, the more likely they are to think it's important, although once again, extremely high levels of importance overall. And then transitioning to the next question, we're focusing now on having facilities such as community art centers, museums, theaters, and concert halls. How important are those for each of the following: quality of life in your community, economic development, and then sense of belonging in your community? Again, extraordinarily high results. Once again, we see that liberals are a bit more likely to say it's important than conservatives. And again, we see trends with the longer that someone has been in Los Angeles, they're more likely to say it's more important. And one thing that's important to note is that there's no real difference in terms of racial or ethnic differences for this particular question as compared to the question above. And then in our next question, we're looking at whether or not residents agree or disagree with each of the following statements about arts and culture. And we have a variety that are listed here. We ask the question randomly so that we're able to have as unbiased a view as possible. And we have them here ranked from highest degree of agreement down to the lowest level of agreement, but still 78% in agreement, saying that they agree with each of these statements is still extremely high. Some of the trends overall, we see a lot of consistency throughout the whole survey, looking at city respondents compared to those that are in the rest of Los Angeles County. With just a few exceptions here, and I just want to make sure I point those out for this particular survey. When we're looking at questions that are focused on my city or my area, we do see that more residents in the city of Los Angeles have a tendency to either be satisfied or in agreement. So, for example, the very last row, on this slide. I'm satisfied with how arts and culture are promoted in my city or area. Higher levels of agreement for those that live in the city of Los Angeles as compared to the rest of the county. And also the very first one about art helps me understand cultures better. That's something that individuals who live in the city agree with that statement a bit higher than those in the rest of the county. We also see some trends overall. Younger Angelinos are more likely to say that they agree with each of these statements than those who are older. Latina or Latino residents are also more likely to say they agree as compared to other racial or ethnic groups. A similar trend is what we saw in the past, with liberals being slightly more likely to say that they agree as compared to conservatives. And then we also see some trends, for example, with murals, cultural festivals, and public art fostering a sense of belonging. We see a higher level of agreement for those who identify as LGBTQ compared to those who do not. And we also see some trends where, for example, the last one, I'm satisfied with how arts and culture are promoted in my city or area, lower levels of support with those who identify as LGBTQ as compared to the rest of the residents within LA County. And we also see in general that people who have children in their household are also a little bit more likely to say that they're satisfied with how arts and culture are promoted in their city or area. For the next question, we'll focus on how would you rate the availability of arts and cultural programs in the following areas: in the LA region, in my city or area, and in my neighborhood. And I'll note that for my city or area, for that question, we pipe in wherever they specifically live, so that we're able to really drill down and kind of have that ownership of the question with their own city's name in that particular question. We see that as one has children, they're more likely to rate the availability of arts and culture in their neighborhood as higher, but that number of people who say good for that rating in my neighborhood decreases with the amount of education one has. We also see a definite difference with how people respond to city and area, whether or not they live in the city of Los Angeles. People who live in the city of LA give a 15% higher rating of good for the availability of arts and cultural programs in their particular city. And then I know we spoke about this briefly, but just want to kind of reiterate some of the differences that we see looking at city respondents as opposed to those in the rest of the county. In the middle set of bars, you can see the difference. And this is one of the more notable differences throughout the survey. Like I said, there's incredible consensus for most of the questions, but this is one where there's a notable difference in something that we wanted to highlight. But however, if we drill down to my particular neighborhood, we see that the rating of good is lower, only 68%, but we see a lot of consistency between the city and the rest of the county. We also wanted to look at the results if we break them down by supervisorial district. We have a map. For those of you who don't automatically know all of the boundaries of the supervisorial districts, and that's okay if you don't, they'll be changing here soon with redistricting. But the map on the right and then the data on the left. And you can see, again, as we've talked about, a lot of consistency across the board. There are some notable differences going back to that city or area, with District 3 having a higher rating of the good availability of arts and cultural programs, whereas other parts having a lower rating of the good availability. And then here on our second to last slide, we have broken the region down by service planning area. So for those of you who are more comfortable with seeing the map of LA County by the SPAs, you can see the numbers here, just broken down slightly different way. And one of the things that is notable which probably comes as no surprise, Antelope Valley, up in the northern portion of LA County, are the least likely to say that that the availability of arts and culture is good, down at 61%. But those who are in Metro LA, again, not surprisingly, are the most likely to say that their neighborhood has good availability of arts and culture. And then here, as we get to the last slide, we also broke the data down by APC, so you can see if, again, we want to make this data as easily understood as possible for whichever way you're most comfortable looking at the maps, focusing specifically on the City of Los Angeles, the Area Planning Commission, and seeing there's in general a lot of consistency with the one anomaly being the harbor APC. We've seen a difference in a number of the survey questions that we've asked over the years. The harbor results tend to be a little bit different, where there's a higher rating of good availability of arts and cultural programs in the LA region, and then in the city and area, we see that number fall dramatically when we get to specifically on our neighborhood. So that wraps up the presentation. We're happy to answer any questions that you have, and I'll go ahead and stop sharing so we can see faces a little bit better, but I'm happy to pull up any of those slides if there are any particular slides that you'd like to see again. And then Alejandra, I'll ask if you can help with the moderated conversation now.
Yes, of course. While we wait for audience Q&A, Bree, we did have a question come to us in the chat. If you could return back to slide 12, that's the one on how would you rate the availability of arts and cultural programs in the following areas. Someone asked if you could please quantify slightly more likely for liberals over conservatives. Does this mean a 2% difference, 5% difference, or 10% difference? What do you mean when you say slightly more likely?
Gotcha. And I'm sorry, which slide did you say it was?
Slide 12.
Okay. Sorry, let me see. Okay, I think this one was. So for that one, the differences are not huge when we're looking. We want to see if something is at least double what the margin of error is. So for example, this survey has a margin of error of 3%. So we're looking to see if there's at least a 6% difference. So for any of the comments that we're making about differences by demographic group, it would have more than a 6% difference, but it's extremely rare for there to be much larger than that 6% range. So usually about 6 to 10% is something that we would highlight. If there's something like a 2% difference, that would just be considered within the margin of error and not something that we would want to be highlighting because it could just be due to the randomization and sampling of our data.
Can you clarify the number of responses for responses who answered the questions on arts and culture?
Sure. So for these particular questions, there's 2,003 respondents for the survey overall for the county. And then we had 1,003 respondents specifically in the city of Los Angeles, and then 1,000 who were outside of the city, but still within the county boundaries. And then we weight the results back to the actual breakdown, which is closer to about 40% in the city of LA.
Thanks, Bree. There are two questions that are very similar, but I'm going to ask them separately. As researchers, would you expect to see the same kind of pattern of response rates across a diverse geographic range, for example, proximity to urban centers, et cetera?
So I'm happy to give some feedback from our research side, and then Danielle, if you would like to speak about that from some of the work of your office as well. We are not surprised to see that there are some differences geographically, depending on people's proximity to what they would consider more major art centers. Although we have seen a lot of definitely with the results and people understanding that art is not just going to a museum, or art is not just being in downtown where they're exposed to the buildings that host a number of art forms, but really understanding that arts and cultural programs, in addition to all of these different questions, for example, on this slide, that art just doesn't happen in one particular place, that it happens throughout the county. But Danielle, I'd love to get your feedback on that question as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say, and I don't know if I'm totally answering the question, but what is really striking for me about the response rate is that there used to be this idea that art happened along Grand Avenue, right? And what has become very, very clear is that communities are recognizing that culture and creativity and art making and cultural activities take place at the neighborhood level, and that people want more of that. That this last question about I'm satisfied with how arts and culture are promoted in my city area, it really speaks to me that there's a deep commitment and a deep desire to have greater access at the neighborhood and local level. So that would be my takeaway from it.
A similar question, and Danielle, I'll ask you to answer first. Do you think the differences between LA region versus city versus neighborhood more reflect people's perceptions of arts and culture, or their perceptions of their neighborhood?
Gosh, that I think could be a study unto itself. I think it would be a combination. I don't think that in the general public opinion survey, these questions in culture, people haven't been asked about culture. People are asked about environment and police and transportation and public safety, but I don't think people are asked this question. So for me, I think it becomes kind of a new baseline, and it's something that we should explore further. What I think is really extraordinary is something that in my conversation with Brianne is that what was striking from her is that we knew that we would probably get a good response rate in the affirmative. I mean, let's be honest. But what became really clear, and I'd like Bree to talk about this, is that it seems to be unanimous, right? That across all subject areas, arts and culture is the place, is the subject matter that Angelenos agree on, whether you're in the North Supervisorial District or in Council District 15 in San Pedro. It's across the board. So I give that back to Bree.
Sure thing. Yes, this was one of the things when we had first talked about drafting some questions. We talked about it, and we explained that we're happy to discuss different themes, but whatever questions we ask on our survey will be made public. So we kind of joked that it's like, okay, we have the assumption that people are going to be very positive when it comes to art, but regardless, their results are going to be part of this public forum. And when we got the results, I can still remember sending Danielle a message and just being like, you're going to be so excited about these results, because this is, we really kind of spent a lot of time going back and forth on how we should be structuring the questions to make them be as neutral as possible. But the results are incredibly overwhelming. I mean, some of these questions that we're looking at, seeing levels of support of 88, 89, and 90. 88 is usually not a baseline for anything. I don't think there was a single question that had a demographic breakdown that was even less than 60% in the affirmative. And I'm 60 made. I'm trying to hedge my numbers a little bit just to make sure. I know it was higher than 60. Most of them, there was very little difference. If our numbers are, for example, for this particular question, are going to hover somewhere between 70 and the mid 90s for the agreement levels. This is not typical. Usually when we're doing survey questions, for example, asking questions about COVID earlier this year on this same survey, there were a lot of things that Angelinos were certainly divided on, differences of opinions one way or another. But when it comes to arts and culture, it's very, very clear that the residents are in support. And that in some of the areas where there's just a little bit lower level of support, it's just about the satisfaction of how it's being promoted. And that gives LA room for improvement in the future years. Alejandra, do we have any more questions in the chat or in the Q&A?
Yeah, we have a couple more. So the study shows that residents do believe that arts and culture are important for improving their overall quality of life, increasing economic development, and fostering a sense of belonging in their communities. Can you then explain why it is so difficult to get funding for these ventures, or do you believe there's a discrepancy between these two factors?
Well, speaking from
Danielle.
yeah, I was going to say, speaking from the research, I feel like it's pretty clear on what we should be having more funding for. But Danielle, would you like to talk about that?
You know, I think that many of us who have been in the, you know, either in the public policy side, in the delivery side, in the funding side, I think we keep asking ourselves that question. And, you know, being inside as general manager for the department for the past 7.5 years, I actually think that there has been a pretty exciting shift, at least with our public authorizers, that that they are recognizing the power of arts and culture in a way that we haven't seen in the past. The department has seen an increase in its annual budget. We're currently at an all-time high, and it's still largely insufficient. For me, one of the reasons why I felt that this particular partnership was so important is that the center and Loyola Marymount University is something that our electeds, our authorizers, they listen to. And so many times, you know, we in the arts sector we talk a lot amongst ourselves, but I don't know if we have found a way to partner with those entities that are actually informing public opinion. And I you know, it was a little bit of a crapshoot, but I think that this helps our electeds get behind arts and culture even more because their constituents are saying this is what they want. And that's very powerful.
Bree, how was arts and culture defined for survey respondents?
So good question. And like many of our research questions that we ask, we choose to leave it up to the individual to define, so we don't offer clarification. If somebody does ask specifically for a definition, we would ask them to kind of reflect and like, well, what does it mean to you? And then would ask them to complete the question accordingly.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think we anticipated that it would be broad, and we wanted it to be broad because we believe that arts and culture is broad and it is reflective of the population of Los Angeles, and we wanted people to bring what that meant. We didn't want it to be a prescribed. We didn't want it to be prescriptive.
Mm-hmm.
Bree, can we go back and take a look at the slide with the breakdowns by the region? Someone wants to know if we can see any difference in results by income level within these regions.
So that isn't something that we had looked at for this particular study, but I will flip to the end where my email address is listed. And if that individual would like to send me a message, we can certainly run the numbers by whatever the particular geographic variable is that you would like to know. and then look at the data from within those geographic regions, how it's broken down by household income. And that goes for that question as well as any of the other questions. If there's anything anyone would like to know, and we don't just have the numbers offhand, we're happy to run the numbers and send you the results.
A couple more questions about our respondents. Did the survey ask how many of the 2,000 respondents are employed within the arts and entertainment industries?
So no, that's not something that we have asked in the past. Because there are so many different categories of what people do for their work, that's something we've discussed whether or not we would want to include, but not something we have data on. However, that is something not specifically defined as arts and culture, but within the census data from the American Community Survey, we could find out what the percentage is within Los Angeles County. And our goal is that the results are as representative of Los Angeles as a whole as possible.
Given the staggering percentages, have you considered expanding or readministering the survey to increase the sample size?
So we have talked about the possibility of adding questions to other surveys that we do. We will not likely be expanding the sample size, but because we're asking surveys on a number of surveys and then surveys from year to year, we have talked about adding some to a future survey that we would be conducting as well, and also being able to kind of look at some different partnerships with arts and culture and other elements. For example, an upcoming study that we'll be doing looking at police and community relations, and discussing how we could add questions related to arts and culture on that survey. Oh, Danielle, you're muted.
Yeah, that's actually something that, we are in conversation with. And so I guess the question, we could even maybe use this, since there's 41 people in the room. What are the questions we should be considering, as it relates to public safety? And we have a few more minutes in today's conversation. So if there is one that you would like to see, what would be your best question that we should consider including in the next public safety survey?
So not exactly related to public safety, but someone read your mind in terms of potential questions. It's more a comment, but would be interesting to ask an open-ended question at the end of the survey, asking respondents how they would define arts and culture.
Yes, thank you. That would be. I'll switch gears and take some notes here. But if there are any other questions or any other feedback for the question that Danielle posed, we'd be happy to take down notes as we're working to draft that survey now.
All right, don't all come at once and throw in your great ideas. I have to say, what is really exciting about this is that LMU has the infrastructure set up. They do this on a regular basis. They are extraordinary to work with, and especially as we move in a kind of post-pandemic moment where we maybe are moving more into an endemic. I think that the value of arts, culture, and creativity, especially knowing how we all needed our stories and our access to content, kept us sane, and how deeply we want to be able to connect. I think that this is going to help us, hopefully, and advance the work of culture and creativity in our city for the benefit of all. And, I think that's our hope, at least.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I see there's a note in the Q&A about a line of questions with aspects of the built environment and community and how that makes people feel safe. Thank you for that feedback.
Thanks, Eva.
Not sure if you're seeing it. Bree, Danielle, there's one more question in the Q&A chat box. Thinking about future survey, even though people love arts and cultures, wondering what the responses would be if they were forced to make budget choices between arts and culture and sanitation, arts and culture and fire, for example.
Yeah, you know, the city, I think it was under Mayor Villaraigosa, there was kind of a participatory budget survey that would go out, and it would essentially ask that question. And that's when I was on the nonprofit advocacy side, as opposed to the inside advocacy side. And that always is kind of an interesting frame because it would in a sense force people to say, okay, well, if you want arts and culture, you're going to have to, you know, reduce the fire department, and that it would always kind of pit culture against other essential city services. And I would be really interested to know if there would be a way to structure a question around that that would help us to get to, we don't want to just have a fire department, right? We want to have a civil society. We want to have an engaged society, and we want to have a society where everybody feels like they belong and are participating and that have the opportunity to be seen and celebrated and supported for the output of their creative ideas. So I think it's a really important question, and I really appreciate you bringing that to fore, because it could be one that we could work on. I'm not sure how we would structure it. I'd leave that to Bree and her team.
We're always up for the challenge.
Yeah.
A couple more. Bree, someone is asking about statistical significance.
Yes. Is there a particular question about?
The question is the sample size statistically significant?
Oh, yes, it is. And we would be able to have actually a much smaller sample size and still have this be a statistically valid survey. One of the reasons we have the sample size that we do is so that we can break this down into different groups, both geographically as well as demographically, and still have a large enough respondent base from which to analyze the results. For example, if you had 600 people total in a survey, that would give you valid results without any issue. You'd still have around a 4 or 5% margin of error. But then if you were breaking that down into the demographic groups, looking at race and ethnicity, or looking at geographic areas, the sample size within each of those categories would be very small. So you would want to be mindful of what those numbers would be. Although 600 is still perfectly fine, even 400. So the fact that we do 2,000 is just to completely err on the side of caution, and then be able to do all of our breakdowns and filtering and answer all the questions that we're able to answer.
Thank you. Danielle, could you speak a bit more on any initiatives in the works to increase the accessibility of arts and culture events to low-income, historically underserved communities? Excuse me.
Yeah, one of the things that the Department of Cultural Affairs is a unique local arts agency. In addition to a grant-making organization where we fund about 300 organizations, most of those organizations operate under, $250,000, and they're really sprinkled throughout the city of Los Angeles. The department also has a community arts division that provides direct instruction to the arts, provides exhibitions and cultural festivals. So think Canoga Park Youth Arts Center, Barnsdall Junior Arts Center, Watts Towers Art Center, Lincoln Heights Youth Art Center. We also have a group of partnered centers that are essentially nonprofit arts and cultural organizations that operate city buildings and that are extensions of the department and of the city's access and equity initiatives. And then finally, we are building cultural infrastructure. Space is a really big issue, and the need for space and cultural space in our city is quite, we need it, and we need it in communities that may not have a lot of nonprofits. And so the city is still building. It has about $150 million capital investment portfolio for adaptive reuse. So we have projects in Skid Row with Engine Company 23. We have projects like the Vision Theater, which is undergoing about a $35 million historic adaptive reuse and modernization project. And I think as we look towards the horizon, specifically as it relates to the infrastructure deal that's being worked out in Washington, I think we really need to set our sights on making sure that there is new cultural infrastructure that's being built, because even the cultural infrastructure that we currently have in the works, a lot of those projects, they're going to sunset with Proposition K, which was a 30-year-old ballot initiative. And so I think that there needs to be a new discussion about Prop K succession or successor initiative that will likely have to go to the voters. And that's going to be something that the arts and cultural community is going to have to get behind, as well as the city council and the incoming mayor. Those are really going to be the critical components of making sure that every community, regardless of resources, should have access to free and low cost direct instruction in the arts, places to celebrate, places to be seen, places to be platformed in their community. So I think we've got a lot of work to do, but I'm kind of really excited about the possibilities for the new tranche of resources that's going to be coming down the pike.
Thank you, and I think that's it for our questions.
So, all righty. Thank you all so much for attending. For those of you who gave feedback either in the chat, in the Q&A, or in a direct message, we'll be collecting all of those so that so we can have all of those suggestions in one place. Thank you so much again. If there are any questions, thank you so much, Alejandra, for dropping that into the chat. You're welcome to take a look at any of those materials. There's the report that has all of the tables, all of the questions broken down by all of the demographics, as well as a link to the presentation that we went over today. And as always, I'm happy to answer any questions, as is our research team. Thank you so much, Danielle, for helping us being able to put together this event. And thank you for all of you who are in attendance.
Thank you so much. And we'll be sending out the slides and the recording of this later this afternoon.
Thank you.